proposals shortly to make elections credible. And also, we'll hear from statesman Sam Jonah passing a damning verdict.
For me, no election is as important as to warrant the loss of even one life. And the silence over it is numbing. The least of that we deserve is a public inquiry.
We have details plus here from the governing NPP on what changes can be made to improve collation of results in our elections. That's on Top Story, brought to you by Vodafone. Together we can, and Gassem, the nation builder. Thanks for your company. And tonight, the opposition NDC has rejected the Electoral Commission's assessment of the 2020 polls. The commission says the exercise was the most peaceful, successful, and seamless election in the history of our fourth Republican history. Now, the 2020 polls had results in a number of constituencies disputed, with the presidential elections results requiring judicial pronouncement to resolve dispute over the outcome. The death of 5 persons, at least, has also been mentioned by election observers as a blot on the nation's image as a beacon of democracy. Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers, who is the immediate past chairman of the United Nations Office for West Africa, is concerned about this. Listen to him.
We should also be concerned that perhaps in that regard we lost one of our bragging rights. I personally used to always say, when I'm talking in other contexts where things are tense, and say, well, look, I come from a country where when we have elections, yes, we have our differences, and you have the tension associated with elections everywhere, but there are never any deaths as a result of these elections. And if they occur, they are accidents that happen from from accidents of vehicles or motorcycles, people going to or from party events. But I think this time our image has been tainted in that regard, and it should be of concern to us. One person's life is one person too many to be lost in an election.
Well, the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, CODEO, agree with this view. Dr. Kojo Pumpunia Sante is with CODEO.
Now, the BBR process recorded very serious cases of violence. Our security governance desk, when they looked at the 20 incidents of violence that they had, 14 out of it were very serious because it involves the shooting. You know, in the previous time, you had a lot more incidents, but they were not serious. But this involves gunshots and even hitting bystanders and so on. So that, for us, unfortunately, was more violent than previous ones, even though it had lesser incidents. So, yes, we had the provisional register. We did the...
Well, that's Dr. Kojo Pumpunia Sante there with CODEO. Well, over the weekend, statesman Mr. Sam Jonah also had cause to talk about election 2020, and he says that no life is worth losing because of an election. For him, the least the nation deserves is a public inquiry.
We have just finished another election, the 8th in the series since the beginning of our fourth republic democratic experiment. As usual, the accolades came from all over the corners of the world, and we took them with pride, as we should. But we failed to tell the world, what we failed to tell the world is that some people lost their lives in the course of the election. Ladies and gentlemen, for me, no election is as important as to warrant the loss of even one life. And the silence over it is numbing, as it gives the impression that it is okay and it is to be expected. No, it is not to be expected. It is not okay. Let me say that one of the saddest moments for me was after the State of the Nation address, when a prominent MP was asked why there had not been serious outpouring of grief about the death of the innocent people in Techiman. His response was that as far as he was concerned, they were undeserving of any sympathy because he saw them as armed robbers. For me, that was a new low for the country. We also witnessed, arguably, the biggest assault on our democracy since the beginning of the Fourth Republic, when on the eve of the swearing in of the president, at a time when there were no ministers, and crucially, let me repeat, crucially, There was no Minister of Defense. Armed soldiers, that is to say, officers from an institution that works by command, invaded our parliament, and up to date, no serious answers have been provided. This could have been grave, this could have had grave consequences for the future of our country. The least of that we deserve is a public inquiry. Have we become so numb to these things?
Says Sam Jonah there over the weekend. Well, today, in spite of the criticism, the EC has scored itself high marks for the conduct of the 2020 polls. Director of Training at the EC, Michael Bwedi, says the elections was the most peaceful, transparent and efficient in Ghana's Fourth Republic. He's been speaking at a high-level post-election stakeholders review workshop on the 2020 presidential and parliamentary elections organized by Kodeo.
In addition, between 2016 and 2020, we increased the number of polling stations by 10,000. This means that the Commission hired 146,122 more staff working on anticipation and election day alone. And yet, we managed to reduce the cost per person by almost half, as already indicated. For the first time, the ballot papers, BVDs, and voter registers were sent to the district 2 weeks before the conduct of the election, as against the past, where these materials sometimes reach their destinations a day to the election. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, from the foregoing, one can safely conclude that the 2020 presidential parliamentary elections was the most successful, well-coordinated, efficient, seamless, and the most peaceful election organized in the Fourth Republic of Ghana. As an election management body, we are not resting on our oars, but we are committed to improving on our service delivery to the good people of Ghana.
You heard that the EC Director of Training, Michael Bwedi. They are head of our political desk, Evans Mensah, joins us live from Ada. Well, Evans, thanks for your company tonight. The EC's very first public announcement on the disputed 2020 elections, and I'm sure it's been drawing reactions at the forum. Tell us more.
Yes, it has been. And as you can imagine, there's been some reaction to the EC's assessment. It was a very detailed presentation that the EC put forward today. A detailed pre-election period, during the election itself, and post-elections. And they gave specific examples that they believe backs their claim that this was the most successful elections in Ghana's Fourth Republic. One of the striking ones had to do with the cost of the 2020 elections. They assert that they have managed to reduce the cost of Ghana's elections compared to the 2016 election by as much as 100%. And they go into some details about that. They say that, for example, the 2016 elections cost the Electoral Commission then $13 per voter. For the 2020 elections, they claim that it's costing us $7.01 per voter, which is a significant reduction. And that hasn't happened before. And they are aiming to bring this down to the international standard of $5 per voter. And then, of course, they talked about the questions about security. Now, they say it's the most peaceful. And I think that is the area that some people have questioned. In fact, Professor Jimabudi picked up a microphone and asked the question, how can you claim the elections is the most peaceful in the Fourth Republic when you have this number of people dying, for example? It is the same view you get when you speak to Alex Segbafia, who was a campaign coordinator and a functional executive committee member of the NDC. I put that same question to him if he agreed with the Electoral Commission's assessment, and his answer was categorical.
Well, I think that is it Chinua Achebe who describes it best, that the lizard that fell from the yoko tree says, if nobody will praise me, I'll praise myself. So, I mean, they're entitled to their opinion. There were some good things that they did during this last election, definitely. And there were some bad things and horrendous mistakes that were made. And because we really have to look at some serious electoral reforms before 2024 comes along. And without guarantees for those reforms, then we would definitely be in a worse position than we are. There are so many issues that I don't know, as I said, The NDC as a political party is going to put together a paper. We put in a committee together and we'll do a paper on what reforms we believe should take place. And we just came from our retreat in Ho with the regional officers, so we have a good deal of information and which we are dealing with. And once we do that, we'll come out more comprehensive. But at least it's good to come and listen and give a few pointers of things that must occur. We think that the Electoral Commission, and I'll state that in the meeting, bit more than it could chew. And possibly there was some level of inexperience which affected their performance. And we hope going forward they will listen more as well and take on board certain things that have been said. And what do I mean by that? They were given a tall order coming even into the 2020 elections. We had 2 referenda. One was scuppered at the last moment, but all the work had been done, if you remember. They had to prepare registers for the new regional voting for the referendum. Then we had to prepare they had to prepare themselves for what was potentially going to be whether DC should be voted for or not. At the last moment that was scuppered, but all the work had already been done. And then they took upon themselves the need to say they were going to form a new register in the COVID season. What was the sum total of all these? Blatant mistakes were made. One is the disenfranchisement of people in the Sal region. A day before the election, you decide they cannot vote in parliamentary elections. That actually, on its own, is enough for you to say this wasn't a free and fair election.
So you almost get the impression when the EC official was speaking that this must have been a near perfect election.
Exactly.
I mean, there wasn't any point in which he even intimated that there's something they need to improve.
Exactly. And if you go to the Sal region, they'll tell him a different story. I mean, they haven't voted, and it's creating all manner of problems. And even if you take the EC went to Parliament and produced Form 127, which gave us a pink sheet that had a space for you to get the verification of how many people voted through the verification. It's an accounting process. Using that, you're able to tell whether there's been overvoting, whether people have stuffed the ballot box, etc. Because when you finish counting and the verification machine says there were only 10 people who voted, but you have 12 ballot papers, then you know 2 are out of place and there's a problem. They didn't print the document that way. It was pointed out a couple of days before that, look, what have you done? This is not what you went to Parliament with. Why have you changed it? And then they said, oh, we'll give people stamps. In fact, they actually said we will go and print again. And then when they came back, they said, no, we give people stamps. And their people were meant to stamp. 2 things happened. One, many of them didn't stamp, so that point of accountability and verification was lost completely. And 2, those that even stamped, not all filled out the figure. So there's a lot that we all can talk about and learn. And these are just a few pointers, Evans.
But some will look at it and say, well, don't they have some external affirmation of this? So the EU, for example, in its recent, post-election review document, almost said the same thing about the elections being free, fair, and peaceful. And then you have the Supreme Court also then validating the outcome. The EC itself gives the same outcome. I mean, at least two external bodies have said the same thing. Isn't that, I guess, grounding of what their position is?
We have question marks about things that the EU says. And it's a question of degree and how you want to play it up or down. And I just think that the level to which it has been played up is, for me, unfortunate. We have real problems, and we've had real problems in this election. To give the impression that this is an election that is free and fair, a lot of the external partners are comparing us with a lot of our neighboring countries and what is happening in the African subcontinent and etc. And when you do that comparison, of course, Ghana looks fantastic. But why are we comparing ourselves with the people who are now struggling to get where we were? Let us be aiming higher and see how best we can improve. So if you do the comparison that way, downwards, then of course you say, oh, in Africa, Ghana is doing well. No, you don't do that. It's like saying, oh, there was minimal violence in terms of incidents. We've just heard, there has never been an election where this number of people actually died officially. And it's never been the case. So how do you then say that, well, there wasn't just snippets or pockets of some violence? No.
So that's the NDC's Director of International Relations, Alex Segbefia, there interacting with you, Evans. But you also interacted with Peter McMahon of the NPP. Did the party hold a different view?
No, Peter McMahon agreed entirely with the assessment of the Electoral Commission that this indeed had been the most successful elections. But I must add that he acknowledged that it can be a near perfect elections, that it had to be a scenario where you improve some aspects. And he had his own thoughts about what can be improved for election 2024.
Yes, I agree with them. But like any human endeavor, there's room for improvement. Because you do the comparison between 2020 and 2016, and you could see that there have been major improvements. Nevertheless, there's still room for improvement. And I like to see every election being a better one than the previous one. So a scenario like this, where CDD, through their means, are bringing all major stakeholders, media, security, political parties, etc., to look at what transpired at the 2020 elections, the good, the bad, the ugly, and to look at the way forward, the reforms, is very important.
The NDCs, Alessia, had an issue with the way the EC postured, that they didn't even leave room in their presentation for the improvement, for example, that you talked about. They presented it as if this was a near perfect elections.
Or maybe this is the first time he's attending such a forum, but I have been here in 2012, 2016 with CDD, looking at a review process. They will have to do their presentation, but when it gets to the plenary and discussions, as later it turned out to be, people have different ideas that they will bring on board, which the EC themselves will hold on to. They will latch onto it and then do the necessary reforms, be it administrative, political, or constitutional and legal. So that's this normal.
You mentioned the need for improvement. Which area would you think we need to improve based on the 2020 elections going forward?
I would say the collation system. Because you see, if you look at this conference room, there aren't such rooms physically in the 275 constituencies, but they have averagely 150 polling stations to deal with. So when presiding officers are coming to the collation center with their two boxes, the parliamentary and presidential, and the results they have gotten from the various polling stations to line up, the place become chaotic. So the infrastructure, then the system. What is the laid down procedure systems for the collation? If you ask me, I would say we should go down one step lower. 2 weeks ago or last week, there was a district assembly elections in Nkoranza. The results were collated at the electoral area level. So the general election results can be collated at the electoral area level and then brought to the constituency center. So instead of 200 polling station presiding officers coming with their materials, you will get maybe 50 electoral area collation officers bringing them to the district or constituency collation center. In that case, the citizenry will know the results right away at their collation centers, and they will not troop to the constituency collation center, which has always presented attacks and violence, as happened in Techima South. The security tried to drive them away from the collation center. They won't.
That's where people died.
It happened, yes. It happened in Escado Kitan. They were shouting, and then some of the media people will pick it up. They have won, they are stealing, they are doing that. So if we go down, I think it will put a break. So we must look at the structural and the systematic underpinnings of the collation system.
So you hear that Peter McMahon, campaign chairman for the 2020 elections of the NPP. Now, Evans, we've heard from the main political actors. How about civil society and other participants? How are they receiving this near perfect verdict of the EC?
Well, I mean, thankfully, I have with me Rhoda Oseafo with the Codeo. They organized this workshop with all the stakeholders, including ourselves, the media. And she joins me here with perspectives and reactions to what has happened today. Let's start. Everybody was looking forward to what the EC will say. I mean, post the election petition, this is the first time we're going to hear their own assessment of the process. You have the assessment. What do you make of it, considering that you also had done your own monitoring of the elections over the period?
Well, thank you very much, Evans. It's good that we are hearing from the Commission and also the other stakeholders, the political parties. They've shared their views on what they think happened with the elections. For us, as an independent observer group, we think, and this is something we shared in all our official reports on the elections, we know that generally, based on what we had observed in previous elections and this one, the processes no doubt were smooth and there was some slight improvement in the voting processes. But at the same time, we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that there were some serious issues to do with violence. And here, we wouldn't even want to limit ourselves to what happened on election day or the post-election processes, the coalition processes. But we know that right from the beginning, in the pre-election environment, during the voter registration exercises, there were incidents of violence. Some people were killed. And so these are serious issues that we can still have a positive assessment of the elections, but at the same time, we have to find a way of dealing with the challenges that we saw with elections. And I think that's one thing that we don't want to lose sight of. Other than that, then we would say that we are okay. Meanwhile, we know that there's room for us to improve on the processes.
They also made a major disclosure about the cost of the 2020 elections compared to 2016. That is dropped by 800% in spite of the COVID environment and the COVID expenditure. How important is that?
Well, I think is something that is welcoming, is good. The reductions, as they indicated, is quite significant and is commendable because we are looking at how best we can cut down on costs, given the meager resources that we have and we are struggling with. What is not clear is what really went into the calculations, okay? What were the cost components? So if there was reduction in which areas, what were the factors that went into the calculations for the previous figures? These are information that we are not privy to. We are not so much sure of how much went into, say, hardware, personnel, and other areas. So it's not clear, but assuming that the information is accurate, that given all the indicators, we did far better, then it's something that we think is very commendable, and we encourage them to look more into their processes and see how further we can even cut down on costs.
You have all the political parties represented here, all the civil society groups, even the judiciary at the very high level. The Supreme Court is represented. Everybody who mattered in the election process is represented here for the next 3 days. What outcomes are you expecting? But most importantly, what do you intend to do with that outcome?
So, I mean, we know that with every elections, there are some challenges. And so for every election, what CODIO does is to look at the processes, the conduct of the elections, and to see how best we can improve on election integrity, electoral credibility. So for the next 2.5 days, what we are looking at is reflections on some critical issues and what reform agenda we can set. Before we leave here, we want to have a clear plan in terms of what areas can be strengthened as far as our electoral processes are concerned, and how realistically we can address those issues. And I think it's good we are hearing from the different stakeholders. If you listen to Professor Kenatefa, you realize that there's a lot that we can do with the NIA system as far as the voter register is concerned. There's some opportunities, there are some possibilities. How can we as stakeholders work together to ensure that moving forward, we're able to improve even more significantly the conduct of our elections?
Yeah, I mean, briefly on this point about the NIA, Professor Tefa disclosed, in fact, he was emphatic that there's no legal barrier to the EC, for example, adopting the Ghana card as the voter ID card. The EC's response to that was, it's possible, but there may be challenges. And there was a consensus in the room that going to 2024, there should be a plan to adopt the Ghana card as a sole card for one, if you have to register, and two, to vote. That certainly appears to be a game changer.
I mean, for the one of this workshop, I think the one positive thing has been the consensus, which you talked about this issue of the national identification system and what we can use it as far as our electoral processes is concerned. And I think, like you said, the opportunities, once there's the will, there's the political will, all others can really fall in line. And I think that's one thing that leaving this place on Wednesday, we will be putting on the agenda. There's a lot. The Electoral Commission has been talking about how to cut down on costs. If the NIA system can save us costs, not just even financially, but even the tension. If you look at the tension that is associated with the compilation of voter registers, really these are things that we should be able to do away with. And if the NIS system presents us with an opportunity that helps us to do away with those kinds of tension, then we should be welcoming it and looking at the ways in which we can perfect that system, even with the challenges that we identify. I think today the outstanding issue is how we can link people to their polling stations. But from the deliberations, it's clear that there are possibilities, there are solutions, whether it's in terms of technology or, in other areas. And so living here, we want to see a clear agenda in that, how we get to use the NIA system to its fullest use.
Okay, Rhoda, thank you very much. And that's Rhoda with the Emefa. She talks about that consensus. So don't be surprised if for 2024, your Ghana card becomes the only card you require to go and vote. And indeed, it's been one of those areas that almost everybody, including the Electoral Commission themselves, believe can happen going forward. But I'm also going to tell you, Emefa, that the Electoral Commission itself, just a short while ago, admitted that they've learned lessons. One of the key areas they've learned a lesson from is the imposition of a 24-hour period to announce the results. The Electoral Commission officer says, well, that is one of the areas they've learned the lessons, and they would definitely work to improve that. And then there's a second area where they themselves assess themselves about the collation center. The EC official declares that they have already done an assessment, and for 2024, they are going to deploy spreadsheets at every collation center, and they're also going to employ people who are going to be doing the collation will be people with statistics background. So it sort of minimizes the challenges we saw with the collation, which really was at the heart of the conflict and the violence we saw in the 2020 election.
Okay, that's the head of our political desk, Evans Mensah, reporting live from Ada on that forum that's currently underway. They're organized by Codeo. Is a high-level post-election stakeholders review workshop on the 2020 presidential and parliamentary elections, organized by Codeo. And that's it for Top Story, brought to you by Vodafone. Together we can, and Gassim, the nation builder. Newsnight starts right after this.